A storm sweeps across the North Atlantic. Waves rise like black mountains. A distant hum of engines fades beneath thunder. The faint crackle of radio static whispers in the dark. It began in silence. No trumpet of war, no roar of tanks across open fields, only the sea. Vast, cold, endless. Beneath its surface, shadows moved. They were unseen, unheard, yet they would come to decide the fate of empires. The German commanders called it their unsichtbare front, the invisible front, the war that could not be seen when the Second World War began. The oceans were more than just borders. They were arteries of life and survival. Britain, an island nation, depended on the sea for everything it needed to endure: food, fuel, weapons, hope. And Adolf Hitler knew that if those arteries were cut, the heart of the British Empire would stop beating. Yet this would not be a war of tanks or trenches. It would be fought in silence, under thousands of tons of pressure, in darkness so absolute that even the concept of night and day lost its meaning. The German U-boat, short for undersea boat meaning undersea boat, was designed for this hidden war. These steel predators would patrol beneath the waves, invisible to the eye, waiting to strike. Commanders like Karl Dönitz envisioned an ocean controlled by the unseen, a battlefield with no front lines, no flags, only the deep dot to the men of the Kriegsmarine. The Atlantic was not just a stretch of water. It was a living, breathing enemy. It hid its dangers well. Ice-cold currents, sudden storms, and the endless horizon turned even navigation into an act of faith. Above them, Allied planes prowled the skies. Below, the sonar pulses of destroyers searched for their echoes. Between the two, the U-boat men lived suspended, neither alive nor dead, neither seen nor forgotten. That was why the German commanders would one day call it their invisible front, because, in the Atlantic, death had no face. The wolf packs rise by 1940. The German Navy began unleashing what Dönitz called Rudeltaktik, the wolf pack tactic. Instead of lone hunters, U-boats now moved in coordinated packs. Communicating by encrypted radio through the infamous Enigma machine, they hunted convoys that crossed the Atlantic, carrying supplies from America and Canada to Britain. When a single merchant ship was spotted, a coded signal went out, and within hours, half a dozen submarines would converge on the location, like shadows closing in on prey. The attacks usually came at night. The U-boats would surface under the cover of darkness, engines humming softly, their periscopes glinting faintly in the moonlight. Torpedoes slipped silently into the sea, then, seconds later, explosions tore through the waves. Survivors would speak of how the ocean itself seemed to catch fire. Burning oil spread across the water, illuminating the faces of men desperately clinging to debris. The cries of sailors drifted across the cold wind, soon drowned by the sound of distant engines fading back into the dark. For the U-boat crews, this was victory. For the world above, it was terror. The Atlantic became a graveyard, thousands of ships gone, tens of thousands of lives swallowed by the deep. Yet for the German commanders, this success was both a triumph and a curse. Each victory only made the Allied response more brutal, more relentless. And beneath the waves, the hunters would soon become the hunted. The Allies strike back by late 1941. The balance began to shift. The Allies learned to listen to the ocean's heartbeat. Radar and sonar, then known as ASDIC, allowed ships to detect submarines before they struck. The British cracked portions of the Enigma code, intercepting U-boat communications and predicting their movements. What had once been a silent, invisible campaign now became a deadly game of detection and deception. The North Atlantic, once ruled by the wolves, turned into a killing ground. Destroyers dropped depth charges that exploded with thunderous force, crushing steel hulls and extinguishing entire crews in seconds. Inside a U-boat, the experience was hellish. The walls groaned from pressure. The lights flickered, air grew thin, filled with diesel and fear. Men sat silently, sweat dripping from their foreheads, counting seconds between explosions. One wrong move, one leak, and the ocean would rush. In cold and merciless, many submariners described hearing the ping of sonar like the ticking of death itself. They waited, helpless, as depth charges rolled into the sea above them. The invisible front was collapsing. What had once been an unseen empire was now being dragged into the light. The turning tide of 1943 marked the year when the Atlantic truly turned against Germany. New Allied aircraft, like the B-24 Liberator, extended patrol ranges deep into the ocean, closing the mid-Atlantic gap, that once safe stretch of sea beyond the reach of land-based planes. Long-range radar and improved convoy escorts meant that boats could no longer strike with impunity. The hunters had nowhere left to hide. In May 1943 alone, Germany lost 41 U-boats, a catastrophic blow that Dönitz described as the blackest month. Even he, the father of the U-boat fleet, began to see the truth. The Atlantic could not be conquered, only endured. For the men beneath the waves, the illusion of invincibility was gone. Each patrol became a suicide mission, yet they went willingly. They wrote letters they knew would never be read, spoke in whispers that vanished into the roar of the engines. Some painted names on the walls of their cabins, reminders of wives, children, homes that felt like dreams. Above them, the Atlantic rolled on indifferent, eternal. The war had turned the sea into a machine that devoured both sides. The human cost beneath the waves between 1939 and 1945. Nearly 40,000 men served aboard German U-boats. Over 30,000 of them never returned. It was the deadliest branch of service in the entire German military. Statistically, a U-boat sailor had a higher chance of dying than a Luftwaffe pilot flying over London or a soldier on the Eastern Front. Yet they continued to fight, bound not by ideology, but by brotherhood, by the belief that they were part of something vast and invisible. To the German commanders, this invisible front was no longer a strategy, it was a grave. When the war ended, the survivors spoke of the silence most of all. The silence when the engines stopped. The silence when they surfaced to see burning ships on the horizon. The silence when they returned home to find that there was no home left. The ocean had taken everything, and yet, in its cruel way, it remembered them. Even now, Russ and wrecks lie scattered across the seabed, their iron bones covered in coral. Their names forgotten by all but the sea, the shadows that remained after the war. Admiral Dunnet stood trial at Nuremberg. His vision of the invisible front had both defined and doomed the German Navy. The U-boats had almost starved Britain into submission, but in doing so, they had forced the Allies to master the ocean in ways never seen before. New technologies, sonar, radar, long-range aircraft, reshaped naval warfare forever. The lessons of the U-boat war would echo into the Cold War, when both East and West sent nuclear submarines beneath the same dark waters, still believing that what could not be seen could not be defeated. To historians, the Battle of the Atlantic remains one of the most haunting chapters of the Second World War. A war not of land and blood, but of depth and silence. It was fought not for territory, but for control of the unseen, the supply lines, the lifelines, the hope of nations. It was, in every sense, the invisible front. The sea remembers today. The Atlantic is calm again. The waves roll endlessly, indifferent to the ghosts that sleep beneath. Fishermen's nets sometimes catch fragments, a rusted valve, a faded emblem, the corner of a shattered hull. Each piece is a whisper from a war that never truly ended, only sank deeper into the water. Standing on the coast of Lorjang or Wilhelmshaven, where the U-boat pens still stand, one can feel the weight of history pressing through the salt air. These massive bunkers of concrete and shadow were once alive with sound engines, orders, the clatter of boots. Now, they are silent, except for the echo of the tide. The German commanders called it the invisible front because it demanded everything: courage without recognition, sacrifice without monument, war without witness. They fought an enemy they could not see, in a place that offered no glory, only endurance. And when it was over, the ocean kept their secrets. Fade to black. A faint sound of sonar echoes through the darkness. In the end, the Atlantic took them all, not out of malice, but memory. 'Cause even the sea remembers the men who fought upon its surface, and the shadows who died beneath it.